So we're going to get started, and our other panelists will arrive when they do, and we have a really excellent set of speakers today for this session that is called Weathering Political Uncertainty of Large-Scale Conservation Projects, a event series we've been doing for about the last 6 months, along with partners including those that are also working with us today. The Global Island Partnership, the UNDP GEF Small Grants Program, the Blue Nature Alliance, Micronesia Conservation Trust, and Big Ocean. And so we'd like to really thank all of those organisations. My name is Kate Brown, and I am with the Global Island Partnership, the Executive Director of the Global Island Partnership, which is a partnership that was founded in 2006 by two leaders of islands with a focus on mobilising political leadership, helping islands to work together on common issues, and also helping islands to strategise around how to engage in international meetings like the one that we're at right now. I'm really happy that this event is being recorded. We've been mostly operating on Zoom, and so we have a big audience that we will share this with. So one thing is thank you to all the people that were able to make it this morning. I know everyone is back in their hotel rooms on this final day of the UN Ocean Conference or getting ready to leave. And so we really appreciate those people that can make it physically to this event, and we also look forward to sharing this very widely out once this event is over. But without further ado, I'm going to move us into our program. And we really started this process of looking at how do you maintain action while things change at the political level, because that's what we've been working on in the Global Island Partnership, as I said, for the last 15 or 16 years. And we see multiple political leadership changes. I'd like to ask our first speaker, Mr. Jabba Batista, who's the Deputy Head of the Secretariat of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs and also a GLISPA board member, to open us with some reflections on his experience on this topic, and then we'll move into a panel.
Thank you very much, Kate. Good morning, ministers, co-panelists. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. And when Kate asked me to talk with you today, I was really happy because I am a big fan of GLISPA and the partnership that you have built around the world. And as I was reflecting coming to this event today, I started thinking about what is the connection between leadership, governance, and partnerships. And often when we talk about governance, we refer normally to the government. And in many ways, those two words, of course, are very much related. Governance normally can be understood as the system that controls or manages an institution, some kind of operation. And then the government is the actual body that does that. So government is definitely central for governance. But at the same time, there is another term that I think often as we move in this partnership world and in this leadership world, we sometimes forget to differentiate, and that is effective governance. So we can have an institution, an NGO, a government that has a governance system, but doesn't necessarily have an effective governance system. And I think we do need to be conscious of that. To be effective, that governance system needs to be clear about its competencies. It needs to know what is going to be its direction, where it wants to get. It has to be transparent. It has to be accountable. But I think most importantly, to achieve those three things that I just mentioned before, it has to be participatory and it has to be inclusive. And that's where I think the word partnership comes in. Because when you talk about a governance system that is effective and participatory and inclusive, That means that you are pulling together a number of actors that have common objectives, that they have trust in each other, and therefore can also build honesty among themselves. That they have a true connection, and more importantly, that by building that partnership, they can join forces to create collective action and actually have collective impact. And it's really great to see our two ministers here, because I think those partnerships cannot be possible with champions. And all partnerships need champions like the ones that we have here today at the podium. But I think it's important to highlight that in this weave of words that I've been talking about, governance, partnerships, leadership, championship, that we need to build championship at multiple levels. We have our government champions, but we also have our NGO champions, and we, importantly, need to have our community champions. So we cannot leave behind any of those champions, because it's truly together when we have this collective champion approach that we can have true partnerships that allow us to have effective governance. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shaba, for those very wise words. And we've worked together for a very long time. He had a long job working with in the Caribbean region on the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund before his current role. And so we really value his insights this morning. I'm going to move now to our panel section, in which we have a really esteemed set of speakers and a wonderful moderator. So our moderator will be Aulani Wilhelm, who's the White House Assistant Director for Ocean Conservation, Climate and Equity, and we might have seen her yesterday on a much bigger stage with the President of France. So we're very honoured to have her here with us. And then we also have Honourable Heremoana Maamaatuiahutapu, who's the Minister of Environment and Culture for French Polynesia, and Honourable Vaughan Miller, the Minister of Environment and Natural Resources from the Government of the Bahamas. And so I think we'll also have Jabba join this panel and reflect a little bit on what has been heard. And then we have some speakers at the end who will give us more of their thoughts. So over to you, Aulani.
Thank you so much, Kate. Bon dia, hello. I'll say aloha. So I may have this strange job right now, but I'm an islander at heart and actually have worked in this field of large-scale conservation, working in oceans, and have felt very much the issues that are being raised in this series of dialogues. And I just want to say thank you to all of the partners who are raising this issue, because there's lots of material out there, or growing material, on how to go about thinking about developing this or designing these things. But we really need some honest conversations and some best practices on how do these things endure across political changes. And it's also wonderful, I see friends from Indonesia and Argentina and from Chile who have all been working in large-scale conservation and have seen these changes and weathered these changes as well. And so I think coming together, sharing these stories, figuring out how do we bring these best practices together is going to be a really important body of work to help move this forward. It's amazing that despite the differences in political systems and geographies, as human beings, sometimes these governance issues versus government structure, I think that's really insightful that you shared. We do the same things, some really well, and some of these mistakes we just keep making. And so how can we just have some good conversations about that? And it's really with that, I welcome the spirit of this discussion and hope to further these relationships forward. So maybe we can just start with some remarks from each of you ministers, and maybe we can start with you, Minister. I know we all call you Heremoana because Maamaatuiahutapu is a little bit much, but that's the Hawaiian pronunciation for you. Please.
Maruru Aulani I rana tātou pato ai tō tātou wharerit ai tēnei mahana. O tau te moana mātou I o nei. Te teitei te mana, te iti te mana, whari mai te tāpa ono te rofa. In my culture, we have to introduce first things in our words to say to say hello to all the people in the room. So that's what I did, don't worry. It was very good words with a lot of mana inside. Thank you for the great opportunity you are giving to me. Like Aulani said, my name is Heremoana Maamaatuiahutapu. Heremoana is the way the people call me in Tahiti. And moana means the ocean. Here means love. So in English, it would probably mean ocean lover. And it's something that I really like. I'm the Minister of Culture, Environment, and Marine Resources in charge of crafts and languages for the government of French Polynesia. All those portfolio has a link. This is not just something that the President of French Polynesia gave to me. There's a link between all of those portfolio. Previously, I had also many other activities. I love to cultivate the land. I love fishing. I was negotiated also cultural pearl, black pearl. Manage a public cultural establishment in my country. Create several events, dance contest, film festival, music festival. And I also participate several times in traditional dance competition that we have now for 180 years, every July. It's important for us to dance and to sing. One of our chiefs, one day, because of all the people dying after the first missionary came in our island, was wondering why my people was dying. And then he said, it's because we forgot to sing and to dance. We forgot just to be ourselves and to be alive. All this to tell you that we have several lives. We must have several lives. And when I entered the government of French Polynesia, I set myself the mission that all the projects that I would carry out as minister could be taken over by any of the beneficiary. So they will never stop at the end of the mandate of a government. To illustrate what I mean, I would like to give you two examples. The first example is what we call in our country the rahui. That's the link between culture and environment, for example, and marine resources. It is a terrestrial or a marine space on which unwritten rules are applied in a traditional way. The management of this space is entrusted to Tohitu, a council of elders, and their decisions are rarely discussed. There are no sworn controllers or report of fighting, of offenses of any kind. The compliance with this rahui is part of the societal rules accepted by these local communities. And we have some for now, like, we don't know, many years. As our elders testify in this regard, like my grandmother, police surveillance is not effective enough because there are men who need to sleep. while surveillance by our ancestors is more effective, they never sleep. For my second example, I would like to tell you about a municipality located in the Tuamotu archipelago and made up of 7 atolls spread over 90,000 square kilometers. It all started in 1972 when the owner of a small atoll called Taiero asked to classify the closest lagoon of his island as a nature reserve. In 1977, we obtained the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve label, a label which will be extended to all 7 islands of the municipality of Whakarava in 2003, and renewed in 2016 for a new period of 10 years. Today, the Biosphere Reserve of the municipality of Whakarava is the largest and one of the oldest biosphere reserves in the French network. It now covers a maritime area of, like I say, 19,000 square kilometers, in which professional fishing is strictly prohibited. This biosphere reserve is managed by a management committee made up of all the representatives of the population of this island. Supported by the Department of the Environment, it is the population that makes the management decision that concern them and no one else. For example, they have decided that an excursion to their island must be done only by local guide. Some places also are strictly forbidden to any human presence. It is even forbidden to take photos or video in the southern part of the island of Whakarava, where lives 700 sharks. We don't want the sharks to be like movie star. That's it. No, it's very important because it's really disturbing for all those fish. So they said the only traces you will leave on the island are your footprints. And you will only be able to take away wonderful memories in your head, no photos, no video. So how can we overcome the uncertainty of the political governance of our protected areas? Quite simply by involving local population as much as possible. That's what we try to do in French Polynesia. Maruru for listening to me. Thank you.
Maruru roa for that. Those important themes, right? How people, first of all, you can't have any kind of durability, any kind of future without people. And this perspective, right, of you don't even know how long those early rahui were, right? They're millennial old. And it's really the values and the principles that's underneath your grandmother's words that I think are what we need to hold on to when we're in political cycles that are very short. Thank you so much for those comments. Minister Miller, it's a pleasure to have you on this panel, and it's a pleasure to meet you. I would really appreciate if maybe we could turn to you for some opening remarks on the topic.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Madam Moderator, distinguished panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. As political leaders with responsibility for conservation initiatives in our respective countries, we must be forward thinkers who all seek to establish legacies for others to follow and subsequently carry on. The Bahamas, the country that I'm from, is comprised of some 700 islands and keys, covering over 100,000 square miles. Our northerly islands are less than 100 miles off the coast of South Florida. Our southerly islands are between Cuba, about 60 nautical miles of Cuba, and of Haiti. The primary agency in the Bahamas with the responsibility for conservation is the Bahamas National Trust. This agency today has responsibility for some 32 national parks, covering some 2 million acres of both land and sea. This agency was initially established in 1958 as the Exuma Land and Sea Park, the first of its kind in the world, as it was the spawning ground for most of our marine life. Cognizant of the importance of the need to protect the area, our government created the Bahamas National Trust, an agency which has withstood many political administration changes and today fall under the auspices of my ministry. Also, we have the Inaugura National Park, situated on our most southeasterly island. It was established in 1965, serves as the home and nesting grounds of the world-famous West Indian flamingos. More than 100,000 of these flamingos make their home on this island, and over the years, there have been any number of game wardens overseeing the orderly functions of the park. While the Bahamas, we are thankful and we're grateful that we've been able to build capacity and achieve continuity and work with and establish tremendous relationships with conservationists. More recently, we've heard and we're becoming acquainted and familiarized with climate change and its effect on island states, particularly small island developing states. We've come to see that climate change is not just a fancy terminology, but for us, it's real. Our temperatures are higher. Our main sea level is higher. Ocean acidification is real. And our storms, our hurricanes are stronger. Surely, this phenomenon is impacting and will continue to impact conservation efforts. It is imperative that we all turn our attention to addressing the impact of climate change, while at the same time looking forward to providing the necessary funding to address conservation measures, regardless of politics, regardless of location, but especially for small island developing states. And as I said, the challenges are real. In the Bahamas, we've come to tell our story, and as much as we can, to let whoever would listen to know that on its present trajectory, not my generation, maybe not the ensuing generation, but at some point, we have contributed, we are among those islands that have contributed the least to this madness, but we are positioned to suffer the most from it and potentially can become climate refugees. And it's real. It's more than fancy words. This is our story. And so we've come to speak to and possibly lead the coalition of the willing who would continue to stand up against this and to advance the cause. And hopefully we can pass on to succeeding generations and those that would inherit the country from us. That also includes all of these challenges and issues, that they would be in a better place than we are. And so we've come to tell that story. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister, for that very important set of messages that you're giving to us. And really, stories are the most important vehicle, right, for us to tell what is happening, to bring other people in, and to make sure that it's not forgotten. This coalition of the willing, I think we are feeling more and more every day the importance to take action. We've been talking about that at this conference, right, that this isn't about words, it's about action, and we've now heard it from two of our ministers how important these actions are, but also in both of these islands, they were forerunners in these protections, right? These early protections for the Bahamas in 1958 and in the Tuamotus in 1972, right? And then these successive growth, right? Starting with knowing these places are so special, that these islands have these incredible resources and we needed to protect them. That wasn't because we have climate change. That was because the understanding of the people in these places just knew how really special and took the action to protect it for themselves first. And truly, it's for the world. But the motivation was to make sure those flamingos and those fish and those pearls, I mean, the clams and the sharks and those aggregating areas could still remain. So thank you for both of those stories. And welcome, Minister Turnbull. Thank you for joining us. We're glad you could make it. I know you've had a very heavy schedule. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to turn it to you now, if you could share some opening comments for us.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, to Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I hail from the beautiful territory of the British Virgin Islands, where we believe that when God rested, he rested in the British Virgin Islands. I know my colleagues on my left in the Bahamas will feel the same way. But I believe, and it is a pleasure for us to be here on behalf of the government. Recently taken the position as minister for the subject just about 2 months ago. It is our pleasure to ensure that we are part of creating not just the conversation in terms of what we are saying as we come together as small island states, because the islands are surrounded by the oceans. And what is important for us is to understand the BVI, when you hear about us, are 24 square miles in landmass. But we have 200 nautical miles, or 84 square kilometers of ocean space that we are responsible for. What is important is that we are viewed as small island states, but the importance of what affects us on a larger scale, our oceans are our economy, our oceans are our lifeblood. Because we are surrounded by the oceans, it is important for us to not just speak about measures that we want to put in place. We have been doing efforts and putting measures in place to rebuild our mangroves, to protect our reefs, our coral reefs, and also deal with the litter. So legislation, we actually approving today in our cabinet the Blue Economy framework for our territory. But what is important for us, I believe, is for us to be viewed as a larger state, because the things that affect us in the Caribbean region, in the BVI regions, are, even though we're small, quote unquote, in size, the areas of pollution, the areas of overfishing in our waters, it affects how we operate and how our lifeblood is carried out. So I believe it is important for us to continue to partner with persons like ACTA, continue to partner with the persons within the region, within the UNDP and all the other partners that we have. But more so, I believe what is important for us to gather is the camaraderie and the relationships that can be established from coming to these conferences. I am in my second term as an elected member. I have been to many conferences. This is the first on environment and anything to do with this ministry. But what I believe we continue to lack is we all come together and try to speak our own story about what we want for our territory. But if we band together as the quote-unquote small island states, then it is no longer a conversation about what I can do for BVI or Bahamas or French Polynesia, but what can you do for these small island states which now represent a vast majority of the oceans in the Caribbean, in the Atlantic, in the Pacific, and how what you are doing and what we're doing are affecting us, because you vacation in our islands and in our territory. So let us be able to protect on a holistic scale. But it comes from us united, not just in words, but in action and forming relationships and partnerships that drive the mission forward. So on behalf of the people of the Virgin Islands, I am here, and I am glad for the invitation and glad to be a part of this session.
Again, wearing my Islander hat first of anything, I have to say how very proud I am to hear from these very smart, impassioned, dedicated ministers here who come with from very different islands. Do you hear the competition? We have friendly competition among where God landed, right? So we can all argue about that later. But also this idea of really coming together. And I think, that's the work of GLISPA, to really raise the attention of islands. And I feel like as islanders, we say these things all the time, right? We have contributed the least, but the impacts are outsized, right? That what's happening around the world is affecting everyone. But I think you heard this thread here, but that the impacts to islands and cultures of islands really just threaten the very existence, right? And the very ability to stay and remain in these incredible places, like hubs of biodiversity that bring to the world things that no other. So we talk about this among islands, but really hoping that these messages are the things that having this venue through the UN Ocean Conference, that the message will go beyond all of us from islands, because we've been saying this, and it's really, really important, because you're right, everyone has a favorite island. Everyone wants to come and have the umbrella drink in the island, but let's think about what those impacts are, and let's have a relationship and be able to protect those islands as much as they're enjoyed. So thank you so much for these incredible comments, and really a tone that has been set here for continuing to raise the voice. Just one more thing, and I know I'm not a speaker, but what percent of the world population do people live on islands? Anybody know? And not including Manhattan, okay? So technically an island, we don't mean them, but we do mean Indonesia. So, okay, Kate, you run GLISPA, you're supposed to know that answer. Anybody have a guess? How many people live on islands, right? We think small, scattered, not that many. What do you think? Oh, it's not that high. That would be really amazing. But it's 11%. Now, we don't think about that, because where do the resources go for development, for education, for food, for all of these things? It's not 11%, right? And then you think about the outsized impacts to islands. It's far more than 11% when you think about the compounding impacts on islands. So I just leave that thought, because these three gentlemen are in charge of really important ministries to try to battle within this context. And so I'd like to really turn to start talking about some questions and maybe having a conversation, if that's okay. So I noticed, if I got my notes right, that we have, and Heremoana, you spoke about this, being that your ministry is environment, culture, and oceans, correct? So that's very unusual, right? And we have Minister Turnbull, you have in natural resources and labor, is that right? Again, that's an unusual pairing, very important one, but brings kind of an unusual portfolio to you when you think about that. And I think for you, Minister Miller, environment and natural resources may be more common to have that, which also means your challenges probably are always having to bring the relevance of the environment and chasing after the labor or the commerce ministry. So maybe you could each reflect, and any of you can go first, whoever wants to turn on your red button earlier. When you joined, when you started, and each of you started in different terms, and you got your portfolio, how do you choose? How did you decide? on what you're going to focus on. And then what have you learned over that time to say, where we really need to be given climate, given, impacts of COVID? How do you manage this portfolio to bring these really important founding things together? So go.
I'll go first, and I'll be sort of brief. I'll try it again. I have no voice this time. I think they're rectifying it. Okay. Sounds like they're ready now. Our administration came to power on September 16th last year. I became minister in October last year, Minister of the Environment, Natural Resources. Natural Resources is a new ministry. We've not elevated it yet. We're not going to elevate it until our budget year actually begins today. And so within this budget year, it'll be elevated. And so our focus has been obviously the environment at this point. And the biggest challenge, issue, the hot button issue globally is climate change. And so we couldn't avoid it. And it was something that I inherited as the minister. And for us, in the last term, like my colleague who, I thought he's from the Bahamas when he started talking about God and the beef. I said the man has to be from the Bahamas, but for us, previously we established historic regulations. Legislation in the Bahamas. We established a department, the Department of Environmental Planning and Protection, that specifically deals with critical issues as it relates to the environment. And so it was more than just talking about it. We had the legislation, the strong legislation to support it. And so that was foundational. And of course, when you introduce legislation, there are challenges in the initial phase, but you work through them. And so it's a work in progress, but it's critically important nonetheless. And you come into relationships, the government, of course, we talked about the Bahamas National Trust and other NGOs that we work together. And in terms of our community, the Bahamas, say we're a country of 700 islands, but 18 are inhabited. And so we're an ocean territory. And of the inhabited islands, it adds a challenge because most of our citizens resides on the island of New Providence. That's the proof that God lives with us, New Providence. But over half of the population resides there. And so naturally, we tend to be what we call Nassau-centric. But the effects of climate change are not Nassau-centric. It's for the entire Bahamas. And when hurricanes come, as they will from time to time, our hurricane season began June 1. It ends November 30th. 3 years ago, we had a dreaded visitor called Hurricane Dorian, where they usually rate hurricanes from scales 1 to 5, at 5 being the most severe. The Secretary General of the United Nations graded Hurricane Dorian as Hurricane Hell, category Hell. It suffered over $3.5 billion. So it's devastating to our economy. We have not recovered from Dorian yet. And we're in the midst of another season. And we're praying that we do not have another visitor like Dorian. But we have so many islands, so many different islands. And our ocean is over 100,000 square miles. I'm sure everybody's heard of the stony coral tissue loss disease, whereby our reefs are being attacked, and you don't know why. That's even worse. But we're thankful, we're hopeful that the solution is on the horizon. But for us as an ocean territory, for us with critical issues, conservationists, the NGOs, the organizations, critically important to what we do. And for me, for my ministry, like I said, we inherited the hot button issue of climate change. So that's been, that's a, globally, it's the hot button issue. Our Prime Minister, the Honorable Philip Davis, I've spoken to it at COP26, and he intended to speak to it again at COP27, and he's taken a leadership role, and he intends to continue to lead in that way. But that's been our hot button issue, climate change.
That's why you let the elder statesman go before you, so you could follow through. I know he was going to come back. I know the minister was going to come back on that point with Bahamas and God. That's just what happens with politicians. For me, my story and our story is a little bit different. I got sworn in as Minister for Natural Resources and Labor on May 5th, 2022. And
Really, last month?
yeah, but before the assignments were fully given, it was a little bit more complicated because they had labor and immigration as well. But for us in the territory, I first want to say what is important for us is the partnerships of GLISPA, the partnerships of our regions. But when I inherited this portfolio, looking at priority areas, the first for me, and this might not be popular in this type of setting, but the first for me was dealing with labor issues, labor quote-unquote pains as we call them, because I have inherited the name of the Minister for Work Permits. So that was the first target to try to address. But as it relates to the natural resources area, I believe one of the things that we focus on so much is the areas of brick and mortar, the building of schools, the infrastructure. And one of the most underrated but most important areas of any country is its natural resources. Without our lands and oceans, there is no ability to create an infrastructure or build schools or education or anything for that nature. So my focus now within the ministry area is getting the persons within the ministry that deals with lands and deal with the environment and deals with the seabeds and deals with the sargassum that is now affecting us in the territory and the effects of climate change. But taking our message, the work that is being done through partnerships with GLISPA and other territories and partners, taking the work that is being done and publicizing it. For some strange reason, we seem to have a battle with the information that's on the inside of our minds being put out to the public so that we are all aware. So the campaigns, just like you can run a campaign on schools and the importance of education and the importance of building roads, the environmental aspect of it, the oceanic aspect of it, the pollution and the plastics and how it affects the entire territory. Because we are, in the BVI, we are marketing tourism, just like Bahamas and some of the other territories. We are marketing tourism. But if you destroy the very thing that persons come and drive your economy, if you're not taking care of it, if you're not taking care of the seabeds and how the rain and the rain flows affect everything else, then you have nothing to market. And for us, the minister from Bahamas touched on his health story. We went to 2 Category 5 hurricanes in 2017, which I don't believe, I think the reports from CNN said we disappeared, we were already a dot, but they said we disappeared twice off the map during those hurricanes. But what is important for us is while we have this opportunity from a fresh, quote unquote, fresh canvas, let us do the things to preserve the mangroves, to develop the reefs, to any infrastructural development and any plans that we have, ensure that it is affecting the environment in a way that can be sustainable for years to come and generations as to come. So priority for me within the ministry deals specifically with the heightened sensations, education, enacting of the many laws that we have in our territory, enacting and enforcing those laws so that persons can understand without the environment, we have no territory, we have no land, we have no economy. So that is, those are my areas of focus. Thank you.
I'm in charge of culture and environment and artifacts, local artifacts and languages for 8 years now. And before, I was in charge also of green energy, and now marine resources since last year. Like I said, we think there's a link between culture and environment protection, because we are talking about how we act.
Yes.
So to change the way that we need to act is, we are talking about education and culture, first of all. The second point is that instead of always looking what solution we could find in Western countries, the other countries, we have to look at first the experiences of our elders, because they probably already have the solution. Everywhere in the world, we probably have solution from our ancestors. That's what we are doing now. For example, instead of having MPAs, rules that nobody knows about, never heard about in our country, in our island. You know, there's some island you even don't have TV. Yeah. So how can you explain those people that MPAs is the best solution for them when they are using traditional tools for centuries? Traditional tools that works, like I told you with the Rahui. It's traditional management. Some island with the COVID period that we have never even had problem for food security because they already have the solution. For example, when we act 4 years ago to ban single plastic use in French Polynesia, instead of looking what they are doing in the US, in Europe, in France, we just took local solution, weaving basket with coconut leaves, pandanus leaves, and it gives jobs to our people. Of course, there's other solution that we can adapt in our country. That's what we did, for example, with all those rubbish made of kakemonos, banners, that we transform also as bag. And it gives also jobs to our people. And instead of selling fishing license to big countries, we've developed our own fisheries, who gives jobs to 500 people. And when we decided more than 20 years ago to be a mammal sanctuary in our EEZ, 5 million square kilometers, we are fully protected now for more than 20 years. Whales, manta ray, dolphin, turtle, and sharks. We were the first country in the world to protect the sharks. But those animals are not only animals. They are also, I don't know how to say it in English or in French, but our tupuna, our makua, our guardians. For example, one of my ancestors is a shark, and I cannot kill sharks. So there's always that link with the culture. And the main fight that we have to face is with big countries. Because they look at us as small islands. We say we are not small islands, we are a big oceanic continent. We, in French Polynesia, are bigger than Europe. So there's a kind of condescendence from those big countries for us. Last year in Marseille, I showed a map of the Pacific region. So you can see that the world is blue. And someone asked me, so where's your island? I showed him a very little dot in the Pacific Island, in the center of the Pacific Island. And he told me, oh, where? Wow, you are in the middle of nowhere. I told him, no, we are in the middle of everywhere. That makes a big difference, another perspective. We are not in the middle of nowhere. We are in the middle of everywhere. So that's also something that we have to explain to other people, to explain to other countries. For example, MPA in our EEZ, of course, it's a big deal. We are fishing 6,000 tons of tuna each year. But IUU fishing in the Pacific is 300,000 tons a year. And there's a lot of people, NGO, big country, government, who tell us, stop fishing in your EEZ. We are not the problem. We are not the problem. We could be the solution. The problem is outside our EEZ. A place where there's no rules, where everybody can do what they want. We are not the problem, but we could be the solution. All those islands in the world. We should talk one voice, one ocean, one voice. That's it. Thank you.
Yes.
These are such varied stories, and I don't mean to, I'm just looking at the time and realize that we want to get a couple more questions in. And one thing that I know in my experience, people are always asking about money, right? And so, and the story of what's needed in money, there's going to be different answers here for each of these, each place. And it's not as simple as you say, what does it cost for a large-scale ocean conservation project, right? And that is always so relative. And it's relative because if you've had an MPA like a Rahui for forever, and it's this giant ocean area as the size of Europe, the cost of how to implement would be, what the needs are in the community would be very different than maybe a marine park that is off of an urban area in, I don't know, California or something. I'm looking at Lori, so I'm thinking about California. So maybe I won't lead any of you to how to answer that question, but if people were saying, it's hard over time, right? New ministries, new governments come in. Some of these places have been, protected since the 50s or the 60s. I'm sure there's been variability. But what's really needed, especially in the face of climate change, in catastrophic storm systems, in times where food from the ocean is becoming more and more scarce. If you're to think about continuity of how to resource these things, share whatever you want to share about what people need to know about money in your country. What's needed, and what is the biggest challenge?
I just wanted to add to what my colleague said in terms of us coming together. There's a phrase we've been using, and it's that we've come to be either part of the coalition of the willing, or we've come to lead the coalition of the willing, who will continue this fight together, as we may be small individually, but collectively we're not. And so we've come to unite our efforts and to be united front and to be the coalition of the willing to speak to these challenges and these issues. Of course, I mean, we've come to tell our story, and we've come to not be shy or be bashful about it. It's real. The challenges of the effects of climate change for us is real. I spoke of Hurricane Dorian and the tangible cost, and of course it exceeded that. That's real. How does a small country, the population less than 500,000, the territory exceeding 100,000 square miles, mostly ocean territory, and as my colleague said, of course, New Providence is more urban, but most of our islands are considered rural. How do we? Tourism drives us. We have a financial sector. So when we come, we need funding. There's no way to get around it. We can't dress it up, can't ignore it. So we've come to speak to it. We need funding. Without those resources, without the technical assistance to help us to build the capacity, it just cannot happen for us. And as I said, particularly for us who have contributed the least, if you combine all of us, by far the least, we're not responsible for this. But we are positioned to suffer the most, by far. And we're on the front line of this. It affects us first. It hit us first. And so I really intended to come screaming, help, help, but y'all might have thought I was crazy. So I'm trying to contain myself. But all of us. And so financial resources, it's the bottom line. Where I'm from, the sacred book says, money answereth all things. And we stand fundamentally on that. But more than that, of course, there are issues that says, well, we sent the funding, we sent the assistance to build capacity, but you misused it, you abused it. That's not our story. Very transparent, very accountable. What it was directed to, that's exactly where it went. And we can show the results of it. And so, can't get around it. It's critical, it's important, and it's really the lifeline to what we need to do. That's the bottom line.
Madam Chair, for us, I believe our government typically invests in our people and technical resources who are doing, I would say, a great job. But it is being done to barely get by, so to speak. I believe further investments need to be made, and how it is done is not just solely dependent on government, but the importance of NGO partnerships, the importance of private-public partnerships, the importance of world organizations coming together, small island states joining forces together, and banding the resources that affects any one of us. because all the island states, all the small island states are affected in the same way. So I believe while government continues to do their part, the costs that we are currently using to help with our environment and with our natural resources and the effects of climate change comes through our appropriation and our budget process. But if you ask the question, is it enough? The answer would be no. The answer would be the answer would be categorically no. But what I believe is also important is that we continue to build in the BVI. We are continuing to build on the streams dedicated within the ministries, within government, on conservation projects. To include, right now we have an environmental and tax levy, which ties in the tourism sector. So the persons coming in on our cruise tourism, part of the monies collected there goes towards the environment and climate change fund. We have one of those set up as well. So it is important for us to continue to now market. I believe that will be my key point. I believe that will be my key point, that we market the cries, market the importance, market the outstanding resources that we have. We have partners that come in from the United Nations, from CARICOM, from OECS, that persons go into our oceans and go into our cities and our territories and be able to capture some of what is happening and why we need to preserve this. Because while we market from a tourism aspect, we also have to market from a preservation and an investment aspect to be able to safeguard our shores and safeguard our environment. So I believe financial resources are extremely important.
Yeah, very shortly. You know, before the ocean wasn't in the international agenda since the COP21 in Paris. We went there and we said, all the Pacific Islanders, you're right, you have to protect, talking about climate change, you have to protect rainforest. But don't forget 70% of the planet, which are the ocean. And at the YUC in Congress last year, something happened, very interesting thing happened. European Bank and the World Bank made the announcement for the Green Blue Wall, the Green Great Wall. Very good, but again, we need a Great Blue Wall. We are talking about 70% of the solution. So it's good that they give money for the Green Great Wall, but we need to call for the Great Blue Wall everywhere, in all our ocean, in the Pacific Ocean, in the Indian Ocean, in the Caribbean Ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean, in the Mediterranean. This is the best way to protect also our planet, to have those two ways of finance for protecting the planet and fight against the climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. And thank you to our panel. It has been really amazing. We have two final speakers who are going to reflect a little bit on what we've heard, and we have two wonderful women, which is a great, I think our panel has been really well balanced. And I'd like to introduce Karen McDonald-Gale, who's the CEO of the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund and is also from Jamaica. So Karen.
Thank you very much. I think I'll stay here. So Kate started with my island credentials, and for the cricket fans, to quickly say I am West Indian, I am Jamaican, and my mother is Trinidadian. So I hope I meet the island criteria. I was asked just to give some summary points on what was discussed today. So first, a little bit to say that one of the major achievements of the CBF, where I work, in our first 10 years is the support that we have given to the establishment and strengthening of 10 national conservation trust funds throughout the Caribbean. And before I was CEO, this was my portfolio. And I have to say that the most critical and perpetual need in that process was governance. the process of ensuring the partnerships between the national stakeholders, government, communities, and civil society in these new NGOs was indeed its own challenge. In terms of the discussion today, I just have a few nuggets for us to reflect on going forward. We heard from people with a wide range of global and political systems, but with common cross-cutting themes of how to manage governance. As we think about the need and the road to effective governance, it involves inclusivity and trust towards building partnerships with governments and NGO champions, and for collective action, and more importantly, collective impact. We heard about Rahui, I hope I pronounced it right, Rahui and the universal space to acknowledge the many lives in a governance system and a governance process, and the need of acknowledging and respecting the traditions and learnings from our ancestors, from our own cultures, and our own values, and ways to consider and preserve the human and non-human needs around us. As forward thinkers, the minister from the Bahamas acknowledged the need for continuation of conservation leaders beyond administrations as they build their own legacies, and he mentioned that he was grateful to have a hand when he reached to the table on work that had already begun in conservation actions. And he also spoke to the intense vulnerability of our islands in terms of climate change, natural disasters, and of course, particularly the devastating impacts of Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas. It's also important that we be clear that we are small in land and even in population, but we are large in the planet. Carlos Manuel from Jeff called us bosses, big ocean states, and that's what we are, in case we didn't know, and that we are the lead stewards of global biodiversity. And that requires technical and financial support that should be entrusted to us as the stewards to do the work of the planet. We've talked about the critical value of natural resources and its critical link to an island economy, and the fact that our islands are leaders in that field. It is therefore critical that we be here in the middle of everywhere, somebody said, to be on the floor of the Oceans Conference, where discussions on topics like blue economy are critical to all the islands individually and also as partners and as a group. And we must be united with one voice, the coalition of the willing as small island states, to talk and work together for our joint needs and indeed for our existence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. You had a very difficult job and you've done that beautifully. And Laurie, for some final remarks, and I think we have one speaker here who wants to have 30 seconds right at the end. So over to you, Laurie, from Blue Nature Alliance.
Thank you, Kate, for having us. So I won't sugarcoat it. We live in increasingly polarized and turbulent times. Within too many nations, political polarization is on the rise and basic human rights are being eroded. Geopolitical tensions are forcing wedges. The pandemic, wars, and the increasing immediacy of the climate crisis, which we heard about today, have all contributed to upend our collective perception of stability. Every part of our society is impacted. And so it would be foolish to believe that large-scale ocean conservation is somehow immune to this. We've gathered here in Lisbon to advance the world on a collective path to a sustainable ocean, one in which the entire ocean is sustainably managed and at least 30% is effectively, equitably, and durably protected. And as we celebrate momentum, real momentum, towards that goal this week, we generally assume that once established and legally designated, the MPA will operate in perpetuity. Unfortunately, conservation history has demonstrated that that is not necessarily the case. In the last 15 years, there have been at least 6 countries that have enacted 43 downsizing, downgrading, or degazettement events in marine protected areas, reducing the efficacy of over 1 million square kilometers of marine protected areas, approximately the size of South Africa. And we know that there are some nations, even now, considering additional steps back. But I believe this Bright Spot series is about hope. And so despite these challenges, I want to share what has inspired me this week. I'll start with our speakers today, so please join me again in thanking them for their leadership and for sharing their perspective. There are no silver bullets, but there are key ingredients that we know increase durability of ocean conservation initiatives. One that was spoken to today is steady and secure financing. Encouragingly, we are seeing new financing streams, collaborations, and innovations emerging. I'm inspired by the actions of President Duque of Colombia, who announced this week that Colombia had protected 30% of its ocean territory, and that as he prepares to end his administration, he ensured his successor from a different political party would have the financial resources necessary to implement the marine protected area, negotiating the Herencia Colombia project finance for permanence deal. I'm also inspired by the nation and people of Niue, who recently protected 40% of their ocean territory while establishing a law to sustainably manage their entire EEZ. And they have also launched an innovative new financing mechanism called Ocean Conservation Credits that will ensure financial sustainability for intergenerational equity. We know the second ingredient is people. MPAs and ocean conservation initiatives need to be designed through inclusive, participatory processes with people and their needs at the center. And they need to be governed and managed inclusively and adaptively to ensure they generate the benefits that they were designed for. I'm inspired by the work of groups such as GLISPA, as well as Big Ocean, who create networks of ocean champions and nurture communities of practice for practitioners. We need this deep, deep bench and more. A third ingredient is the integration of culture, Indigenous knowledge, and reconciliation. I'm inspired by the actions of the Kitatsu Hehe Nation on the coast of British Columbia, who last week, in the face of political uncertainty at the federal level, took the step forward to designate the Kitatsu Bay Indigenous Protected Area under their Indigenous laws and following their Indigenous cultural practices. I'm also inspired by the increasing recognition of the importance of Indigenous peoples and local communities and our shared ocean goals. But I recognize we have a long way to go, and so I call on this ocean community to continue to do this better. Finally, as a global ocean conservationist, these are some of the many stories that provide me with inspiration. But if I'm honest, it is my other full-time job, that as a mother of 3 members of the next generation, that is my true source of hope. If we want intergenerational durability, we must listen to and invest in the next generation. Earlier this week, I heard Minister Heremoana talk about the marine education reserves being declared in front of schools in French Polynesia. In Samoa, the Education Ministry is working with partners to integrate environmental and cultural education to connect students to their oceans and associated cultural practices. In each of these nations and so many more, they are laying the groundwork for a generation of citizens that understand their interconnectedness with the ocean. Us grown-ups are not off the hook to solve the ocean crisis now. But while we waver, the next generation is getting louder and more powerful in their call to inherit a living planet. So no matter the political swirl around us, it is our job to heed that call. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Laurie. And I think there was just 30 seconds from someone here who was wanting to say.
Thank you very much. I speak on behalf of my colleagues. Of course, I'm from the country with the 3rd largest barrier reef in the world, the greatest collection of coral reefs in the Caribbean and the Western Hemisphere, the largest mangrove nursery system in the Caribbean and the Western Hemisphere, the largest bone fishing flats and bonefish population in the world, and the largest collection of blue holes on the planet. I come from the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. My colleagues, we say thank you very much. We are happy to be a part of the Coalition of the Willing, and let us all join forces and make it better for those who would inherit the planet from us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you all our speakers.